7 decades ago, the first television adaptation of Superman arrived. Now, it's time to rocket back to the 1952 to 1958 series Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves. In this rewatch podcast, my guests and I break down each episode, from its black and white crime drama beginnings to the kid-friendly color seasons, as we celebrate one of the most underrated Man of Steel depictions of all time. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 1, Episode 24, Crime Wave, is lifelong Adventures of Superman fan and Mr. Reeves author, Louis Koza. Lou, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Hey, I thought we were doing Mr. Zero, Mr. 00 minus 1. Oh, we're doing Crime Wave? Oh, okay. All right. Good. All right.
Crime Wave.
Okay.
Here we are. We're at the end. We've made it to the end of Season 1. Now, in 2 weeks, we are going to cover Superman and the Mole Men, which, of course, was later re-edited into Season 1, Episodes 25 and 26.
Mhm.
But that aside, we have come to the end here of Season 1. It's been quite a journey, and you've been along for the ride behind the scenes. I think you came to the show relatively early on, and you have been so kind and so gracious in your words and your support of the podcast, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for all of your kind words and
You're
support.
welcome. You're welcome. Well, I just think it's fantastic. And number one, for you to do the show, and I noticed that you're covering not only the adventures of Superman, but you're covering a wide range of Superman history, and it's just amazing. I don't know how you do it. It's outstanding, and I'm just happy to be here to finish off season 1, which actually isn't totally finished because, like you say, you got Superman and the Mole Men, which really becomes the unknown people,
Mhm.
for television. So this is very exciting, and for a younger generation like yourself to show some interest in, the baby boomer version of Superman, George Reeves, is says a lot for you, and it's outstanding, and I greatly appreciate, the attention that you're giving it, and you've gone through, all of these great episodes, and to get to 100, the 104, and maybe even Stamp Day. I don't know if you know about Stamp Day.
It's on the list. We'll do that one too.
Okay, yeah, because that would be 1953.
We'll hit that. We'll hit George's appearance on I Love Lucy. We'll
Yeah,
be as thorough as we can be. But no, I
yeah,
appreciate that. Yes, my dance card has been full podcast wise. So my main other Superman show is Digging for Kryptonite, and that's where we're covering the
right,
character across time and media. And I guess that just wasn't enough Superman talk for me
right,
because I
yeah,
started this sister podcast series. But honestly, and I've been talking about it over the course of this season, it was born out of the experience I had going through the first 2 seasons and a selection of color season episodes a few years ago, and just falling in love with it. And we did a couple of episodes of Digging for Kryptonite on it, and I just wanted to explore it more, and it
hmm
just felt like, to your point about giving the show the attention, it just felt like this show deserved it. It deserved to have this kind of spotlight where we're going episode by episode and talking about all of it. And the fact that someone like yourself who's been a fan of this show for as long as you have, the fact that you've been on board with us, that means the world to me. And to the extent that we can kind of get other folks interested in the show or thinking about the show again, maybe if they haven't in a while, to whatever extent we can do that, I'm always
yeah,
very happy.
right. By the way, you mentioned the I Love Lucy segment. Um, I had interviewed in 1994 Keith Thibodeau. Keith Thibodeau is the actor who played Little Ricky. Okay, so if you could get Keith Thibodeau for that episode when you do that, that would be outstanding. If you're interested, you let me know. I'll hopefully I still have his email because it's been since 2003 since I've communicated with him. So I could try to get a hold of him for you.
I will very likely take you up on that. As I thank you very much for that offer. So I want to hear about your experience real quick. Let me set up this episode that we're going to talk about. So again, this is
Okay.
Crime Wave, season 1, episode 24, and February 27, 1953, written by Ben Peter Freeman, directed by Tommy Carr. A brief synopsis here: the first citizen of Metropolis, Superman, wages a one-man campaign to stop a raging crime wave and apprehend the mysterious number one man. Famously, this episode makes extensive use of stock footage and clips from previous episodes in what I thought was a rather clever way, and we'll unpack all of that. But before we get specific with this episode, I really have been very much looking forward to just hearing more about your perspective on Adventures of Superman. Now, I've had a range of guests on the show in terms of age and when they came to the show, when they watched it, all of that. I've had some folks who grew up watching reruns in the 60s and 70s. Is my math right? Were you watching these as they originally aired in the 50s, or were you watching in subsequent decades?
Subsequent. Okay. I was born in 1956. And the earliest memory that I have is it was probably 1961, I would guess. Okay. Um, it was being aired on WPIX, which is Channel 11 in the New York um, tri-state area. And I remember, when in 1961, okay, I couldn't read, okay, because I was too young. And when I saw the end of this show, whatever show it was that I watched, I couldn't read the names. So I had asked my father, who was he? Okay, who was Superman? And he said, that's George Reeves, but oh, he died a couple of years ago. Okay, and I didn't really know what died meant. Okay, it wasn't until maybe a couple of years later that our dog, we had an Irish setter, and the Irish setter had passed away, and that's when I realized what death meant. And so I was hooked. I was hooked immediately. Okay, and so it was the early '60s, and I just knew when to be in the house. I mean, I really wasn't one of those kids that, I mean, I did play outside, but there was no ringing of the bell, and you run to the door, and you get in front of the TV. I just knew, roughly what time it was on, and I made sure I was in the house. And having older brothers and an older sister who had other TV interests, it was kind of tough to get, control of the TV, but I was so wanting to see it that I'm sure my parents, made sure that I got my half hour. Okay, and it was just exciting. It was, George Reeves. I always knew that it was an actor. Okay, even though I didn't know what the word actor was, never even heard of it, but I knew that he wasn't really Superman. Okay, I didn't look up to him as a father figure. I know many people do. Um, and the reason is because I had a great dad. My dad was, he was really wonderful. He was, Ward Cleaver, okay, in a sense. And so, but anything on television, I knew it was people playing these parts. Same with the Little Rascals, the Three Stooges, anything. There was, I was trying to absorb everything I could. Whatever was on Million Dollar Movie. You'd see Hercules, Steve Reeves, okay, Jack the Giant Killer. There was just so many things on television. You had like this, even though it was like early, I mean, television was roughly, 10, 12 years old, but there was so much on, and I was just really, glued to it. And I watched everything I could, you know, Mr. Ed, Walt Disney, um, Leave It to Beaver, of course, Dennis the Menace, Donna Reed, McHale's Navy. It was just an explosion of programs, and I'm sure that it affected my school grades because they weren't really that great. So, but watching the television show, George Reeves just the way he was, okay, the way he came across on screen. You see, back then, we were getting a dose of not only, they weren't all in order, okay. Um, so like, let's say Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday might be, season one and season two, and then Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm sorry, Tuesday and Thursday. I got my days mixed up. I'm 66 years old. Okay, so anyway, then there were the color episodes, but the color episodes weren't shown in color because um, television wasn't broadcasting in color. We didn't have a color television until 1965. Okay, and then once 1965, there was this big hype, commercials about um, programs coming in color. And when Superman came on, it really it just exploded. The color just exploded off the television. I just loved it. And but the interesting aspect about watching the color episodes, but in black and white, was that you could easily tell the difference because in the 1950, well, the first season and the second season, the costume, you could tell that, like all of this, it was very defined.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, back then, we didn't know, okay, the general public or the fans, we didn't know that the costume that George Reeves was wearing was brown and gray.
Right.
Okay. Um, so that now when you're watching the color episodes, okay, the blue and the gray, okay, when you watch it in black and white, tend to almost be slightly variations of difference of gray. And so you could tell, exactly pretty much which ones were which. And also, in 1953, George was really at his leanest best. Okay. And then as he started getting into the color years, he, tended to gain a little weight. He wasn't as chiseled as Robert Mitchum once described him, okay, in his book as, George Reeves had a very chiseled look.
Very true. And even for this episode that we're going to talk about, I watched it with commentary on the DVD last night by
Hmm.
Chuck Harder, and
Yes.
I would say the dominant theme of his commentary, because it came up multiple times, was just how great George looked.
Yeah.
Throughout the episode, he's like, "Man, George looks great," and he does. And then especially
Yeah.
watching this first season, it's just it's amazing.
Right. Right. Yes. Absolutely. The 1951 or the first season, the costume was a little, off in a sense. You could see lots of wrinkles but 1953, the second season, that costume looked fantastic, and that S, you know, um, it just looked outstanding. The color years, you could still see hints of of what it was, but the 51 and the 53 season, okay, the S is just the best S, especially the 53 season.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly again I'm very partial to these black and white seasons, but I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to having some fun with the color years when we get there as well. Now, were comics part of the equation for you either before or after? Well, I guess not before if you weren't reading it, but at any point did you get into the comics?
Yeah, absolutely. But you see, what happened is that on Sunday, my dad would take us to church. Okay, and so it was, my two sisters, my two brothers. Okay, and what happened is that after church he would take us to what was called Jack's Candy Store, and it was in Laurelton, New York. And and so we would go into Jack's Candy Store, and you'd walk in there, and they had all of those little round seats, okay? And my brothers and sisters, they would all line up there, okay? And my father would, give them each a quarter to get an egg cream, okay? But I never once bought an egg cream. I never once sat on that stool. Okay, I would go right over to the comic book rack, okay, which was in the back, and for a quarter you could get two comic books because they were 12 cents. And then, for the extra penny, I'd get a little bazooka bubble gum. Okay, so yes, I was buying the Supermans, both Superman and Action Comics, um, Batman and Detective. Those were my four prime. And then, if once in a while there would be that annual, which was a quarter, right? And I was like, oh my God, a quarter! Now it's going to take up. I can't buy two. I got to buy only one. Sometimes I'd buy The Flash, and then sometimes there were other comics I would, buy, like Dr. Solar, or what was it, Torak, Son of Tarzan, and Brothers of the Spear. So yeah, absolutely. Now, when it came to the actual reading of the comic books, very early on, again, I couldn't read, so I was looking at the pictures, at the drawings, okay, and I marveled at. I didn't know who the artists were, but Kurt Swan just really, he was fantastic, and there were others like Al Plastino, but they were just I. So to be honest with you, I don't know which came first, if it was the comic books or the television show. I don't remember. Okay, but all I know is I knew the differences between the two, right? I mean, you don't have Super Horse, you don't have Super Cat, you don't have Mr. Meplexo, whatever his name is, okay, and all of that kind of stuff. And thank goodness. Also, what was drastically missing from the television show was Lex Luthor.
Okay, that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you about. There were a
Yeah,
few things that I've been kicking around as I'm thinking about the show. Mostly things that they didn't do or that they didn't explore. And I wanted to just pick your brain. Lex, I think, is the one that's the obvious. It's because especially since Lex had been brought to life before in the Kirk Allen movie serial, right? So there had been a
right.
precedent for this character on screen, and also, unlike Mixus Pitalik or these other larger than life
I
characters,
can never say it.
easily able to realize on a television budget, right? So I was always curious why. I mean, and I'm curious. Do you have any take on why, or maybe insight from talking to people involved, why
Yeah,
they
it's
never went there?
mostly insight from other people. Sometimes, when you're on the discussion boards, people had their theories, and it comes down to the budget. Okay. But, there are times when there are gadgets that, like Lex Luthor has gadgets, right? But they did have them. And so, I mean, there was a ray gun that Herb Vigran, shot. There's uh, the the plutonium making contraption that Professor Pepperwinkle has. There's, in the Magic Secret, there's another professor that they trap Superman down in um, uh, a hole, okay, and then shoot like these kryptonite rays, and there's great effects to it. So I don't understand why they didn't have a Lex Luthor, because he certainly could have fit. And but but the person that most comes close to Lex Luthor is John Eldridge. That is, he's in this episode, Crime Wave.
Yeah.
So he's my Lex Luthor, even though he's never called Lex Luthor. He's my Lex Luthor. But I think again, it boils down to the budget.
Gotcha.
for some reason.
The other thing too was obviously when we watch television today, it's so highly serialized, and I of course would not expect that level of serialization in a television show from the 50s. However, I guess that's one of the other things I think about it, and maybe that's why I think about it hand in hand with Lex, because in my head I'm like, well, I could envision a world where in Adventures of Superman, Lex pops up, I don't know, at the beginning, middle, and end of a season, and it's just sort of kind of kind of to like sort of tie things together a little bit as opposed to all of these episodes being so standalone. I mean, again, I guess especially for the time, I understand why they wanted to make each one able to be viewed in and of itself, right, and not have to follow all of the episodes. I get that, but
Right.
uh, I don't know. I guess that's the other thing I keep coming back to.
That is absolutely true. Each episode is standalone. They're like little tiny movies, and I kind of like that. It's you get something different, but you'll notice as you watch the episodes that you'll see, um, some of the same actors, okay, in like a string of two or three episodes, okay, and that probably has to do with, the week schedule where they filmed like two or three episodes, okay, and they use those same actors. Okay, if you defer to Michael J. Hayes' book, Flights of Fantasy, he explains, every, film, all the sequences of when the episodes were filmed, and he really did a marvelous job with that book.
It's on my shelf, and I will be spending some more time with it. That was one of the other things I wanted to ask you, because, and I'm not asking you to speak for the entire fandom, but one thing I've noticed over the course of doing this podcast, I feel like especially the veteran hardcore Adventures of Superman fans, there seems to be a high level of interest in the production schedule, the behind the scenes tidbits, and everything. And I feel like it's even more so than with other genre shows. And Smallville, for
Absolutely.
example, is one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about it. And even there, I just feel like with Adventures of Superman, it's this very intense interest in that production aspect. And I'm curious if that's anything you can speak to sort of it's like I get it to an extent. It's not like I'm baffled by it. I do understand,
Yeah.
but I'm just curious if there's anything you could kind of speak to as far as like why you think there is that high level of interest in it.
I really, I think people just like to really read about that. There were two there was a magazine that back-to-back issues, and I think it was in the 80s. It was Cinematographer, and it's still a magazine that continues. And Jan Allen Henderson, in one issue, had explained many of the production special effects, and there was a follow-up with another writer, Paul Mandel, and they both did this, this great in-depth um, um, a presentation of all of the special effects, and people love talking about the directors, Tommy Carr, Lee Sholem, and just it just I don't know why, you really don't find that much with many other television shows, okay, but it is fascinating, and once you start reading these things, it's just, it really brings you into those times, okay, back into the 50s, and you start to feel, the infancy of television, okay, and the threat it caused towards the film industry, okay, or the theatrical films, okay, the studios, the Hollywood studios, because early on, television was in New York City. So as they started gaining, I guess, an audience, they started reaching out to the studios for places to film their television shows, and it basically all went out there. So even though television was a threat to the movie industry, they really worked hand in hand. Okay. And at first, you had a lot of actors that were blackballed if they went into television. Okay. But you had so many actors and they were all, wanting to work, waiting to work, going to casting calls, and if you're limited, you're going to start looking elsewhere. And so they looked towards television. Okay. Because to them, it's work. You know, Whatever you see on screen is a product. Okay, it's like an assembly line of putting together something so that people buy into it, and then they watch the show, and then they see the commercials, and the commercials help pay for the production, and so there's a cycle there. And so it all worked. In the end, it all worked. And eventually, actors started crisscrossing, from film to television. It took a long time, but, thank goodness that that's settled down and nobody's getting blackballed. Let's let everybody work, right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Even just you talk about the initial threat that TV posed to movies, and then of course later we'll have the rise of cable, and then in more recent
Hmm.
years streaming. And so there's always these new, these new venues and new challenges in terms of sorting everything out. And literally, as we're recording this, we're in the midst of a writer strike and an actor strike. So there's always a lot to sort of navigate, especially when we're dealing with these new avenues. So a couple of other questions just about your fandom, because I'm really just fascinated by all of this. Have you? I know from my own experience with Superman and with anything else that I followed in my life that there can be sort of an ebb and flow to a lot of this. Your interest in Adventures of Superman, your fandom of the show, has it been a pretty sustained thing throughout your life, or have there been times where you've kind of been away from it and then you came back? What's the cycle of that been for you?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'm going to say that it never left my mind. Okay, but there were times when it wasn't broadcast on television. Okay, so and that's the difference between the baby boomer generation and some of the younger generation is that, you see, in the 50s and the 60s, we never ever in our wildest dreams ever thought that there would be, VCR, okay, where you could record and it was always, to see that show again, it was reruns. Okay. It was syndicated and there were reruns. And so throughout the 60s, it was, pretty much on every day. Okay. Like in 4:30, 5 o'clock. Okay. But then in the 70s, okay, they kind of gave it a break. And so what happened is that, there was probably, maybe 9, 10 years that I was just wishing and hoping that the show would return to television. But it wasn't until in New York, WOR, which was Channel 9, okay, started broadcasting 2 episodes on Saturday morning. And when I saw that, okay, that was roughly, I want to say, I think that was 1980, 87 or 88. So there was a long string where it just wasn't on. Okay. And, when it came on WOR, which to me it was kind of strange because I was so used to it being on WPIX, right? You see, back in the old days, we associated, certain things with certain stations. Okay, and we only had Channel 2, CBS, Channel 4, NBC, Channel 5, WNEW, Channel 7, which was uh, ABC, Channel 9 was WOR, and 11 was WPIX, and also Channel 13. So, which was the public access. And eventually, you'd see, Sesame Street on
Mm-hmm.
those channels. My sisters watched that. But you see, back in the day, you had to watch it. Okay, you had to be there or else you were going to miss it. And it turns out that there were two episodes that I had never seen until the late 80s, which was the dog, the dog who knew Superman, okay, and the machine that could plot crimes. So when I bought Gary Grossman's book, Superman Serial to Serial, and I go down the list of episodes, I look and I see, wow, there's two episodes I've never seen. So I saw those finally because WOR was showing them in order, and I caught it early. And so I was really looking forward to seeing those two episodes because I was going to see them from a different point of view, which was as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because everything else, I'd seen as a kid, and I've seen them, dozens of times each. Okay, and we there was a time we could tell, as the years went on, in the 60s, okay, you could tell when certain scenes were cut. You knew, hey, they just cut that scene of Superman moving the pyramid, okay, to get the what is it, the some plant to save Lois in a Star of Fate. Okay, now how do you remove the probably the best scene of the episode? That's Superman's strength. But there was so many other scenes that were cut, and you knew it, you because you had this keen memory for it. You waited for everything. And then when something was gone, you knew it.
Yeah.
I know
No,
some
it's
people started writing down what was missing.
no, it's amazing. Rich Roney, who's been on the podcast a bunch of times this season, and he's the exact same age as you. He's talked about how he missed Superman on Earth when he was a kid, and he remembered a kid on the playground at school talking about Superman's origin on TV, and he was like, "What? Like I missed this."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and it wasn't. Now, obviously, we've had DVDs now for quite some time, but Rich hadn't bought them, and so it wasn't until very recent, like in these past couple of years, where he finally watched Superman on Earth and
yeah,
closed this gap in his fandom. And it's funny. So I'm in my mid-30s. I mean, I grew up with the VCR, but at the same time, I was just talking to my wife about this very recently. Like I remember vividly the first time I saw a season of a show on DVD at the store, and I remember it was Friends. It was like the first season of Friends on DVD, and I just remember it blew my mind because it was like, yes, there were reruns and you could tape something, but it was like, oh, all of the episodes of this season of a show are here on these discs. It was,
amazing,
it was
right?
amazing.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, there was a time, I'm trying to think, was it roughly around 2000, I think it was about 2002 or 2003. We still hadn't gotten a box set of the Adventures of Superman, and we were just, we couldn't wait for it. But there was a little bit of a hiccup. We had heard things that they were having trouble finding, and this is Warner Brothers, and that they were having trouble finding some real good quality episodes. Okay, they finally got them all, with the exception of the stolen costume, which is a bit substandard.
Hmm.
Okay, I have a better copy of that episode. Okay, by a gentleman by the name of Dave Orbach, had provided that. And he actually asked me to send it to the people. It was probably Warner Brothers. Okay. There was another group that was actually putting together the box sets, which was New Wave. I think the company was very nice people because I was there when two people I know did the commentary, okay, or some of the special features, and but in any case, we waited and waited for those box sets, but up until then, it was all just kind of bootleg, okay, and some of the quality was good and some of it was not so good. You had people that were able to transfer film, from, let's say 16 millimeter films, which was the 16 millimeters is what was used to distribute to the television stations across the country. And and in a way, those kind of look pretty good. There's a little bit of grain to them, a slight grain, and kind of when you watch them, it kind of takes you back to 1961 a little bit. But uh, with the box sets, they use the 35 millimeter prints, which is very clear. I don't know if you can bump those up and make them Blu-ray, but I know probably a lot of people would buy them if they were put out on Blu-ray. Um,
I would buy them in a heartbeat. I've bought,
yeah.
speaking about old shows, and I reference the Honeymooners all the time, but I mean, I've bought the Honeymooners on VHS, on
Hmm.
DVD, I have the Blu-ray. It's like, and this is another one where I would happily, I would love to have a Blu-ray set of Adventures of Superman. I'm glad I at least have the DVDs because even those, as we've talked about, even those aren't readily available anymore. So,
Right, right.
you know,
Unfortunately, my first disc of season one for some reason doesn't work anymore, and I remember people talking about that. That there's some sort of I don't know, something wrong with that disc. So I wonder how many other people are experiencing that. It's the first disc of the first box set.
oh, that's
But
too
in any
bad.
case, you know, but finally getting them all, in a nice package. mm, they're not all, um, there are some cuts here and there, but it's not too bad, and I think they really did a great job. What is missing that a lot of people love is when you're watching the episode when it's being broadcast, and it would be time for a commercial, but there's a bumper that appears, and it says, "We'll return to the adventures of Superman in just a moment."
Hmm.
And those are missing from the box sets. Okay, and people, that's part of the whole thing. You got to have those bumpers. And I mean, it's just as important as reading about the productions. About all of the behind the scenes, the filming, and everybody, they want everything. Okay. And so, but it really was outstanding that the box sets, finally came out. They got, Jack Larson and Noel Neal. They kind of held out a little bit because, they felt that if they were going to be part of it, that they wanted to get paid, for their time. And eventually they caved in, and they did it, and we're just grateful for that. Now I'll say this, that Noel and Jack were just two of really the wonderful people in this whole interest. The way you see them on television, that's them. They are as wonderful as you see them on television.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. That
Yeah,
really is. I'm sure I'll have at least a couple more questions for you about your fandom, but let's get into Crime Wave here.
yeah.
So, like I said, this makes extensive use of stock footage and clips from previous episodes, and this was within the final batch of season one episodes produced, correct? Speaking about the production schedule, I did look
Yes,
this up,
yes.
yeah. And what was interesting to me was, like I said at the top, I thought that they did this in a really clever way because you don't really get these anymore on shows, and seasons are so short and people can watch them on demand at any time. But when I was growing up, shows that I watched, like Friends, or even later on, like The Office and Scrubs, at least once, not at least, typically once a season in the later years, you would get a clip show at some point, right? And using Friends as an example, I remember one where Ross is deciding whether or not to invite Rachel to his wedding, and he's holding the invitation, and then we see a montage of clips, moments from their relationship. Then she gets the invitation. Then we get another round of clips. And so you would typically get, so I mean, I grew up watching a clip show. I give Adventures of Superman a lot of credit because if they were looking to alleviate their burden in terms of how much they had to shoot for this episode. You could envision a scenario where Jim and Lois are sitting at the Daily Planet and Jim's like, oh, gee, Miss Lane, Superman sure has done a lot since he got to Metropolis. And then you kind of get that montage. But that's not
Yeah,
what they did. They repurposed this footage and crafted the most action-packed episode of Adventures of Superman. I really give them so much credit because I thought that was a really ingenious way of having a quote-unquote clip show, but making it something original. What was your take on this episode?
I loved it. Okay, it's dramatic, it's dynamic. Okay, there are some little nutty things that you see. I mean, in the very first montage, the very first clip, you see a guy sliding into a water drain. Okay, and when you see that, you're like, what? Okay, and I mean, maybe that's that guy, that clown, that those movies with the clown, he's in the sewer. I don't know. Maybe that's what happened. Okay, but it's outstanding. And the crazy thing is there are times. Well, the first montage is, I guess, the police, going from one place to another, and fire engines, and there's this whole crazy stuff that goes on, and at the end of that montage, is a man who he's got his he's a worker on a dock, and there's a truck backing up into him. Okay, and he screams, right? So that, I don't know if you know this, but that was one of several scenes that was cut out of the Maxwell prints, okay, because it was deemed violent.
I'm
So
not
I don't think,
shocked. I'm not shocked, honest, because as I was watching it, I was like, "Oh, that's pretty. Like, it's pretty relatively gruesome, right?"
right, yeah, yeah. And the thing is that you might not be shocked because of what you're used to,
Right.
okay, of today's television, okay? So, if you've watched Game of Thrones, right, that sets the bar, okay? Nothing's going to bother you after that, okay? So, but you've got years and years of television and movies that have shown, all kinds of things. So seeing a truck backing up into somebody, may not look so bad to you, even though it is bad, right? So, but the thing is that for back in the 50s, okay, as you know, there was a Dr. Wertheim, okay, and he was worried about um, what children were seeing in comic books and on television, okay, and so when Kellogg's got to see, those Maxwell prints, that was a little bit too much, okay, some of the violence in those shows. We look at it today and it's mild, right? But back then, there was, the culture of juvenile delinquency, blackboard jungle, and, and just things that they didn't want, television, especially for children, to see those things. It's one thing if you're watching The Untouchables, that's an adult show, okay, but this is Superman is mainly a children's show. It's aimed for children, but yes, adults did watch it, okay, but but if you're going to do a children's show, you can't have that hardcore adult stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so children could watch children's stuff, and adults could watch children's stuff, but children shouldn't be watching adult stuff,
Sure.
right? So they were right to make some of those changes, and Kellogg's, wouldn't sponsor them if they didn't make those changes.
Gotcha. Well, at least we got the full version here on the DVD, but
Yeah.
uh,
Oh yeah.
so initially, we're talking about this initial montage, and we're seeing the story unfold through those clips and through the headlines that we're seeing, that there's this crime
Yeah.
wave rampant in Metropolis. And then we have this press conference in Perry's office, and there were only two things that I bumped up against in this episode. One of them will come later. The other one is here. But before I even say that, help me out here because I was driving myself crazy. Is this not in my memory? This was the episode where it established that Perry had been the mayor of Metropolis, and that's what IMDb trivia says. Yet I watched this, and did I just miss it? Where does this come up, or is it not in this episode?
I don't think it's in this episode. I think it's said somewhere. Okay. I don't think it's important. Okay, to the legend of Perry White. Okay. I think it was just something that was just thrown in there. Okay,
Oh,
somewhere
I don't
along the way.
disagree. I'm sure
He's
it was
also a
just thrown in.
scientist. You know, but there was an episode where he did, do some science work, but I don't think it's really all that important to get hung up on Perry White being the mayor. You know,
It's fat. It's. I don't disagree that it was thrown in wherever it was. Again, my memory was that it was this episode, and again, there's that IMDb trivia. But as I was watching it, I did not come across it, so it must be somewhere else.
it's got to
Um,
be somewhere else.
and at the same time, though, it's. I mean, it's not. I'm not losing sleep over this, and it's not the only thing I think of when I think of Perry White. But I love, and I've mentioned it a bunch of times when we've been talking about these episodes. I love this little wrinkle, especially given how prominent he is in the city. And his position as editor of the Daily Planet is probably sufficient to account for that. I get it. But I just love this added layer of like, oh, this guy used to run the city. That's why at the end of the episode, when Superman brings the number one man, he doesn't bring him to Henderson at police headquarters. He brings him to
Right.
Perry's
That's
office.
right.
I love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that
Uh,
ending is just so brilliant. You know,
Uh, yeah, but I
well, I
wanted to
guess we're
ask you
gonna.
because I was driving myself crazy with this mayor of Metropolis because I'm watching. I'm like, where is it? And I'm going back and I'm rewatching scenes. I'm like, did I miss it? So I don't know.
No.
Audience, if you know what episode it is, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll keep my eyes and ears
Oh, I'm
out as we
sure
make our
you'll
way
get
through season
the
two.
the super fans. Somebody will write out, write it on the what is it, YouTube,
Yes, though.
what episode it is. I'm sure they will, because I tell you, some of these people, they got things down to a gnat's eyelash, with things, and there was a couple of guys, Carl Glass and Don Holmes. They were listing. Carl used to have a site, Glass House Presents, and they used to list every blooper. People would write to them and give them, all the little things. But I mean, there's fans, on like Facebook, they'll talk about, paintings that are on Clark's wall, okay, and they wind up on Inspector Henderson's wall, okay, or elsewhere. They just get into, those minute details.
Yes, yeah. It's interesting. We mentioned the Facebook groups. So I'm a member of a bunch of them. I've posted about the podcast occasionally. I don't do it a lot because I don't want to be spammy about it, but I wanted to let them know because I figured
Yeah,
these are the people.
yeah,
And I know you've
that's it.
shared it too, and I appreciate it. I mean, I've seen these groups with thousands of members. We don't have thousands of listeners here, so it's always curious to me. Like I wonder, and even when I have posted, I think when I've posted about an episode that I've done, I think you've commented on them, and you've actually listened to the episode. And one of our other regular audience members, Mike Thomas, he's another one who does that. I've noticed though, normally if I do post in one of these groups about one of the episodes, what I'll get in response, people just quote, like people will post quotes from the Adventures of Superman episode. It's almost never like, oh, I listened to the podcast, right, or anything like that. It's just interesting to me because I would love to continue to grow this audience here. And so I wonder if a podcast is what other Adventures of Superman fans are looking for or not, or if this particular one is this not the one that they're looking for. I don't know, but we're here, and I hope more people will
Yeah,
continue to
well,
join us.
if there are other pods, which there are, because I was in one a few months ago, but this here, you've got it dedicated, to the adventures of Superman. Okay. The other one I was on was dedicated to, if I remember right, more of the Saturday, I think it was the 80s or the 90s Superboy. television
Yeah,
show,
shout out to
right?
our buddies at Superman Beyond. They've renamed their
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah,
channel, but
and
Tom was on here. We did Night of Terror on
yeah,
this show. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. See, they had me on because of the episode Paranoia with Jack Larson and Noel Neal. So, but this is fantastic. Keep at it because I'm sure that, it'll grow. It'll grow.
I'll say that, and I don't want to just talk about myself on the podcast, but I will just say I'm really proud of what we've done, but at the same time, for people who are and it's interesting too. And when I bring up about people's interest in the production and the behind the scenes, I did start sprinkling in more of that because I sensed that there was an interest in it. But at the same time, that's obviously not our main focus here, and in part because that's been documented so well in so many other places. And so I never want it to be something where I'm just sort of regurgitating what I'm reading. Like I like what we do
Right.
here where we're talking about the episodes and the stories and the characters and how they connect with other iterations of the Superman mythology. That to me is fun, and that's where I feel I can
Yeah.
contribute more as opposed to, oh, I read this bit of trivia.
Right.
I'll do it here and there, but I don't that's not the thrust of it for me. But for folks who are looking for more of that, I get it. I do
Yeah.
understand.
Well, they like to, for some reason, repeat discussing about the wires breaking and George fell, 8 to 12 feet and dusted himself off and, said, Peter Pan flies by wires, but not my Superman. So find another way. And that's where, Cy Simonson came in, and he developed the, what do they call it? The pan, I think it is. Okay. And, he would, you know, lay in the pan. They would put the costume over it, and and then they would be able to tilt him and move him and make him look like he was flying, which is you got to have Superman flying. Um, it's interesting in Superman and the Mole Men. Okay, you don't actually see him fly. You see him take off, right?
Hmm.
But you don't see him fly.
It's interesting. So I've seen. I don't think I will by the time the next episode airs, but I think I've only watched the Unknown People
Okay.
versions of it. I don't think I've ever watched that original Superman and the Mole Men cut. My understanding is they're not vastly different, right? I don't want to get too far afield here, but
There's several minutes difference.
okay.
Okay, not a lot, maybe 3 or 4 minutes. It's definitely worth watching. If you can watch both. Okay. What people like about the Unknown People is the narration.
Mm.
Okay, where you're going, where it's closing out, the ending of one show, and then kind of gives you a little recap, when you get into the second episode. Okay, so there are little differences. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's worth it. See it.
Yeah.
I love them both. I love them both.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to comparing them when we do our final episode here in a couple of weeks of season one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so back to Crime Wave, we get this press conference where Perry White announces that we have to eliminate this wave of organized crime in Metropolis. And what was fascinating to me, and I couldn't help but laugh, he has Henderson there, and he talks about how Henderson has pledged the support of the police department. And I'm saying to myself, why does this need to be stated? This should be an automatic. You're the police. It's your job. I
Right.
don't understand.
Right. Right.
Like,
And you notice it's Perry White is the only one who says anything.
yes. Yeah, and he introduces Walter Canby, who's the head of this new
Who doesn't say anything?
citizens committee, right? Who doesn't say anything, and of course we'll
The
learn more about
Citizens
him.
Committee for a Clean Government,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. But the Henderson thing was just funny, and Henderson, he just looks so pleased with himself as Perry is making this announcement, and it's just
Yeah.
like, buddy, this city's falling apart on your watch here, and it would, and I don't mean to to poke too much fun, but it would be like if Perry said, and the Daily Planet is going to cover this in the news every day. It's like you should. It's the news. But
Yeah.
then I
Well,
don't know.
there's a lot more logic these days. Okay. I'm just going to defer it back to, hey, it was a small screen back in the old days, little tiny screen.
Yeah, no, it's all good. And then of course we get, Perry introduces the first citizen of Metropolis, Superman, and Superman marches in, and that's a cool moment. Again, you can make the similar thing, like why does Superman need to announce he's doing this? It's like you would assume he would be
Right.
anyway, but
Just
it's
go out and do it.
just do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that at least that's our we get that original scene there
Right.
setting this up here, and then we're off, and we have again a lot more of these montages where you see Superman waging his one man war against crime in the city and just taking out all of these goons, and you see all of this at various points in this episode, especially throughout the first half. All of these clips of these fights that we've seen in
Yeah.
other episodes. Which,
Yeah.
yes, after watching 23 episodes, you're watching this like, oh, okay, that's from that episode, that's from that episode, but it still works, I feel like, and in a vacuum, it really works.
Yeah. How about when, he'll be standing there with a crook, right? And then just for like a couple of seconds, they're looking at each other, and then Superman holds off and slugs him.
Yep, it's
You
true.
know, and Kirk Allen always said, if you ever read anything with Kirk Allen, who was the Superman from the serials, right? He always thought, he felt that George Reeves as Superman, he, with his strength, he would knock their heads off if there really was a Superman, right? And he hit them that hard, take their head off, you know. But then later on, George just, deferred to a karate chop, he'd hit him in, the neck.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things. It's like, of course, if we think about Superman's power level, even a more modestly powered Golden Age version of the character, still, if
Yes.
you're hitting someone
Yeah.
at that
But
close range with that
yeah,
force,
yes. But I'll say I love that, that this Superman isn't almighty, it's great that other Superman, that they can do that with others. Okay, Christopher Reeve, turning the planet, backwards, and all the stuff that they do, I think is fantastic. But I like George, I don't, he's kind of like a mild-mannered Superman, right? He's a mild-mannered reporter. He's mild strength compared to the others, and I like that so much more because like what's the scene, the episode, the Mind Machine, where he gets underneath the plane, okay, and he's struggling to get that plane that has Steve Carr Hadley, in it. He's struggling to get it back on course. So you, as a watcher, you're on the edge of your seat. Is he going to do it? Right? You know he's going to do it because he's Superman, but he doesn't do it with just a with just a little hand gesture. Okay, he's struggling to get that plane back on course, and that's what I think separates the greatness of the television show, compared to the others, because it other things just come a little bit too easy for Superman.
I hear you. It's interesting because I mean I grew up with with a much stronger version of Superman in various forms of media, but I really there's really something to be said for exactly what you just described in Adventures of Superman, in the Fleischer animated shorts, even with something I did grow up with, Superman the animated series. He was not all
Yeah,
powerful in that show too. You saw him sweat and struggle as he was doing those things, and again, I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's something that is very visceral and I think pulls you in when you see the character, sweating a little bit. And
yeah,
though I don't agree with this criticism that you hear a lot about Superman. It's too hard to come up with challenges for him. It's like there are ways to do it, but I think this is one way I think to combat that, right? Where you can bring the powers down a little bit, and then he's mixing it
absolutely.
up at kind of a little bit of a lower level, and I think you can, it sort of widens the field kind of who and what you can throw up against him. So
Right.
I love
Yes.
it. I mean, I've been saying it in all of these episodes, the fisticuffs that he engages in. I love it. Logic aside, it's like, yeah, what shape would these? Well, it's funny too because when he brings the number one man into Perry's office at the very end, guy's pretty roughed up there. It's like,
Oh
it's like,
yeah,
what?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, also there's the scenes where I mean, there's not a lot of, you don't see any manhandling, right? But there's the scene where Big Ed Bullock and Nick Marone, they're being interrogated by Inspector Henderson and also Superman. Superman puts his hand on his shoulder. I thought maybe he might, give him one of the, crush his shoulder, speak. Who's the number one crime boss? But, it's funny about that scene is that the narrator says that they have nothing to hold these guys on. I don't know
Yeah.
if you caught that.
I did. Yep.
Yeah, they don't have anything to hold on them. So, but what they're trying to do is get to them. Who's the number one crime boss in Metropolis? Okay, and I was like, I couldn't believe when I heard that. They have nothing on them. So how could they keep them there,
No.
right? So
I know that jumped out too. It's like, okay.
yeah,
And this number one boss, the audience sees these meetings between the number one man and his underlings, the guys that you just mentioned. And the first couple of instances, his face is obscured. The first time he's getting a massage and his head is
right.
down, and then you just see the back of his head. And then at another point, he's still enjoying his day of beauty, and he's got a towel over his face.
Right, right, yes.
And I know later on we have the scene where they're watching the video footage, and we'll get into that. And the room is dark, as is discussed in the commentary track for this episode on the DVD. It's like when you watch this now on DVD on a high resolution television, of course you can see, but if we recognize at the
Yeah,
time on small sets in black and white, of
right.
course, it would still preserve the mystery. Although it's one of those things where we have one new character really was introduced in this
Right.
episode.
Well, I tell you, when I saw it as a kid, you could see right away it was John Eldridge.
Yeah,
It was Canby. You
yeah,
know, so it didn't fool me back in the day. But
yeah.
Sally, the woman who plays Sally, she steals the show. She goes on her investigating, and she spots Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane and Inspector Henderson, and then she goes, and this big sweetheart, okay, when she sees Clark Kent, right, and then Clark, runs down the alley, right, comes back, and then Superman comes out and takes off. And the way they left it, Canby goes, well, we don't really know it's Canby yet, but we know it's him. But anyway, so he goes, okay, boys, we're in business. So you think, right? What do you think?
That
They
they
know his
figured
secret
out that
identity,
Clark is Superman. Yeah, that's what
right?
you think.
You're thinking that they got him. They got him nailed. And guess what? Whoop, went right over their head.
That was, I mentioned before, there were a couple of things in this episode, and that's the other thing where, yeah, right, they hatched this plan where Sally's going to stake out the Daily Planet, and she's going to film all of this video footage of everyone because, and we've seen this in other episodes where people have recognized a connection between Superman and the Daily Planet, right? So this notion has come up a few times of, oh, we can get to Superman through the Daily Planet, and so she's getting this video footage of everybody. And again, as noted on the commentary track, it's like she didn't have a zoom, so it's like when the footage of Lois, it looks like she's right in the car with her. We can suspend our disbelief for that. But yeah, when they're having their home movie night, right, and they're watching all of the footage that Sally has gathered, exactly what you
Sally.
described. It's like this shots of Clark running into the alley, Superman coming out, and they watch it twice, and it's very reminiscent of an episode of Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, season 1, with the kids who have the like their brains are souped up and they have enhanced intelligence. It's a
Yeah,
very similar type of setup there too. But yeah, it's like, well, of course they figured out that Clark is Superman. Yet throughout the rest of the episode, it's never articulated. And
right.
when they call the Daily Planet to talk to Clark, and Sally has the conversation with Clark to lure out Superman, there's at no point does she ever say even or even allude to we know who you are. I'll be honest. When I first watched this episode a few years ago, I assumed that no, they did figure it out, but it was just this dangling thread that the show left out there that like they knew his secret and it was never acknowledged. But in rewatching it and hearing
I
your
was going to
take,
say, did you rewind it?
yeah,
See,
I,
back in the old days, we couldn't rewind.
yeah, no, I know,
So
no,
you'd go, what?
yeah, well, and so that's the thing where now when rewatching it and hearing your take, I do think it's that they don't right like is that the do we think that's the correct interpretation of this? They just don't get it. They think that Clark is running into the alley and like handing a message off to Superman.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's it.
amazing, amazing.
Yeah, yeah. But they kind of see it was kind of they left you a little bit like they know his secret. But when there was no follow up, and again, back in the old days, we couldn't rewind. Okay, so now you were left hanging. So, but yeah, the way it really plays out is that Clark Kent is the closest to Superman he could contact him. Okay, okay, boys, we're in business because now the next thing is Sally calls Clark Kent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "Mr. Kent, you don't know me, right?" And then she goes into telling him, you know, you know, what he wants to do. Well, not at first, but she tells Mr. Kent the overall conversation, is that he's going to give himself up, right? Meet me at Dover's Cliffs at 11 o'clock. Okay, so they know that they've got to. Kent is the guy they got to get to. Okay, to get the message to Superman. Okay, but they they certainly missed the boat on getting the idea that Superman and Clark Kent were one and the same.
It's incredible, but at the same time, I I feel better about this episode now than I did before because to me, these characters being so dumb that they can't put it together, to me, that's the lesser of two evils. When the other option is that they did figure it out and the show just left that out there as this dangling
Right.
thread. So
Yeah. Very very
as
good point.
as much as it's like it's ridiculous that they like that would be their takeaway that he was just handing off a message, but it's like okay, that's fine because as has been established on the show, right? If they had known his identity, they would have had a one-way trip to that mountain,
Oh
to
yeah. Oh,
that
without a
cabin on
doubt.
the mountain.
Yeah. They better make sure they've got their winter clothes.
Get your winter clothes. Don't you dare try to climb down. Didn't work out so
Oh,
well for the last couple.
right.
So and
Ace
then,
and Connie.
yeah, yeah, and so anyway, so Clark, tells Perry to hold the paper. He's going to go, and follow up on this. And interestingly, in most episodes, I feel like Lois would have been right after him, but they had established in an earlier scene that there's some skepticism. People are kind of split within our group here of whether or not the number one man actually exists or if he's this myth. So I think that at least helps account for why Lois doesn't chase after Clark because in most
Right.
instances it's like Clark, you
Definitely.
have a lead, like she would be right there, but
Oh yeah.
she doesn't think that this guy actually exists.
Oh yeah. In modern shows, okay, Lois would have, ran out into the hallway and said, "Clark, I like you, and but I love Superman." I mean, in today's television, they would really have, you know, expanded on that, because they always got to throw in that love relationships, but not in back in the day, there was they couldn't show that, you know.
I know that's one of those other things we talk about Lex Luthor, things that you would kind of typically, expect to see on a Superman show. The romance certainly, but obviously
Yeah,
other shows have really leaned into that, so it all balances out. But this leads to sort of our big climax here, where Superman shows up at this location, and we have the underlings and the professor who has set up this chamber. That when Superman walks into it, the doors close, they trap him in there, and he's trying to feel for a way out, and he can't get out. and then the professor adjusts all the dials and throws the switch, and it's this web of electricity that just engulfs Superman, and he's in pain. And George Reeves, man, did he go for it? He really sold it.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you, I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, how's he going to get out of this? I mean, he's down and out. Okay, I thought not that I figured he would be dead, but I really bought into it that he was laid out. Okay, that he was incapacitated, and I don't know what was the superpower there. Was it stopping his heart? Was that a superpower? I don't know,
Yeah.
but
No, I was curious your reaction. I thank you for sharing that because
yeah,
as I was watching it, I was like, yeah, I wonder for a kid watching this, in the 50s, 60s, so whenever you watch it, but as a kid watching this and seeing Superman, and we hadn't seen that something like that on the show
no,
before, right? And so,
mm-mm,
to see him apparently in such pain and being tested in a way that we haven't seen before. And yes, even though you figure, well, he's probably not dead, but you don't know how he's going to get out of it. Like, what is the twist
no,
going to be? And as it turns out, he's
no,
he's playing possum, but we don't know. So
mm-mm.
I can imagine it would really kept you on the edge of your seat.
Oh yeah, I fell for it all the way. And then when he got up, I was like, duh.
Were you pleased with that reveal that that's what had been going on, that he was just faking it? Was that
Yeah, I
satisfying?
thought it was great. Yeah, I loved it.
it
Loved
it
it.
it works, and I think especially in this context where, because look, you could argue like, well, why did he even need to do that? But it drew out the number one man, right? Like
Yeah,
he
he
came
had to
in.
get, yeah, yeah, that was it. He had to lure, the number one guy out. Okay, so no, it worked. It definitely worked. It was such a, it was a dramatic scene, the fight scene, but even better than the punches given was when he went over to that wall unit, okay, and he just tore it off the wall and threw it, to the ground. That was just wow,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I mean, like that's the thing. Well, what's funny too about this episode, or interesting, is that as we've been talking about making our way through season one, these episodes are so Clark heavy, and I love that, right? And typically you get just enough Superman, right? You get your spectacle, and we always need him to save the day at the end. But so much of these episodes follow Clark. This one really, we're with Superman for the vast majority of it. It's very minimal Clark, obviously, utilizing all the clips and just the nature of this one. But
Yeah,
this was kind of a flip on that formula that we'd seen, and especially to see him here again, throwing those punches and, like you said, ripping those panels off and punching the hole through the door. Like, you really got to see him cut loose in a way
oh
that
yeah.
you hadn't quite gotten before. It was very, very effective.
Yeah, I mean, he really slugged that professor,
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, that little guy. I mean, the guy was, half his size. He took him out, you
Yeah.
know. But it was all very dramatic, and loved it. As a kid, loved it. Still watching it as an adult, I still love it. You know, um, it's not Star Trek, okay, by any means, but I'm going to say that the Trekkies have nothing on the Superman fans.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. And then we get that final scene where he brings Camby, now revealed as the number one man, to Perry's office. And interesting too. We have this other little bit where Perry in a previous scene when they were waiting for Clark, he expressed faith in Clark. He's like, he's never let me down before, right? Because they're waiting and they've been holding the
Yeah,
paper, and Clark still doesn't come back. He's like, he's never let me down. And then in this final scene, Perry's given up, and he's like, oh, Clark. And then of course Superman shows up with Clark Kent's page one story,
yeah.
and shows Camby, who's looking little worse for wear there.
Ooh. I
And
tell you, he knocked it out of the park.
yeah,
You know, George Reeves, he knocked it out of the park. When he came in and he delivered that, there is no more, crime, Boston, Metropolis, that whole thing. Boy, it was wow.
I thought that was very well done. That there's no more number one crime boss in Metropolis
Right.
anymore. My mileage has varied on these buttons at the end of each of these season one episodes. I feel like some they've really stuck the landing. Others have felt a little awkward, but this was perfect. I really thought
Yeah.
this was a wonderful capper to this
Yeah. Oh,
episode.
yeah. Just a couple of trivial things, more of the voiceover. When Perry White is waiting for Clark's, right, to come with the news, Perry turns on his speakerphone, right, and he says, um, the person that comes over the intercom, he says, let me just, I have the note here. If you don't mind me, just
Sure,
take a quick
sure,
look here. Okay. Um, Okay, so, he goes, composing room, Murphy, right? That is the voice of Steve Carr.
ah,
Okay, Steve Carr. He's done a couple of voices in the distance here and there, and he's had several episodes he's been in. He's credited as the dialogue director. Okay, so again, the fans love talking about this kind of stuff. They love searching for places where Steve Carr has shown up. And as you know, he's the brother of Tommy Carr. And I had asked Jack Larson, okay, why Steve Carr never returned, okay, to the second season, because he became, a big, favorite, having, all of these roles that he did. I mean, what was it, Madam Charpentier in Double Trouble? He was
mm-hmm.
great, you know. So, but what Jack had told me was that they were, the studio was getting complaints uh, that, I guess nepotism, that Steve Carr was getting all of these parts, because of his brother. And it's unfortunately that that's what happened, because I know everybody I talk to, they love Steve Carr. He was a child actor. His mother was Mary Carr. She was a silent screen actress, dating way back to the, early films, so, uh, he has quite a history, but we don't really know a lot about him, you know.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the MVP of this first season. He pops up so
Oh,
many
without a
times
doubt.
in such a variety of roles. Yeah, that's too bad. I think you had shared that over Facebook at some point. But
Yeah.
thank you for explaining that here, because yeah, it definitely is a curious thing. It's like, what happened to him? It's unfortunate too, because it's like, you know I feel like nowadays, and we just had this whole wave of the whole nepo baby discussion, right? In this larger cultural discussion about it. But for that to have been the reason back then is interesting, interesting. But at least that
Yeah.
helps account for it, because
Yeah.
yeah, for him to appear as many times as he does, and then to just kind of fade away. Yeah, too
Yeah.
bad.
I mean, he would have been still a great addition, to the show.
Yeah. Look, every time we talk about him, it's like I feel silly, but when I first watched these episodes, I mean, I wasn't watching them as closely. I wasn't watching them for the purpose of talking about all of them one by one in this detail. And it really didn't dawn on me the first time around a few years ago that I was seeing the same person pop up so many times. I mean, I think I made the connection at a certain point, but I still wouldn't have realized he was in as many episodes. But I think part of that is he did such a great job, right?
Yeah.
Embodying
Oh,
all
yeah.
these different characters. It's not like he
Yeah.
was just
Oh,
doing the
yeah.
same thing in all of them. Yeah.
He like the utility man,
Yeah,
you
very
know.
much so. So speaking about guest cast, so you mentioned John Eldridge as Canby, Barbara Fuller as Sally, Al Eben as Big Ed Bullock, Philip Van Sant as Nick Maroney, Bobby Barber as Tony the Masseur, Joseph Mell as the Professor. That's our guest cast for this episode. Was there any other tidbits, any other trivia, anything of note of any of these guest stars that you wanted to mention?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Well, Phil Van Zant, he was in some. Three Stooges episodes. Okay, Bobby Barber was in, some Abbott and Costello movies, and also the Abbott and Costello television show. If you've ever seen Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, he's in that, but very short, small scene. Um, John Eldridge, his acting career dates back to like 1934. I think he's, if you look at IMDb, okay, it looks like he's in way over 100 movies and television shows. He was in, some, Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy, but a lot of cameo, not cameo, a lot of small parts. But there are a lot of films that he was in, and I wrote it down, okay, because I wanted to bring that up. Um, that he was in. He was in. Um, well, he was in Perry Mason. He was in a lot of westerns, but he was in the Paul Newman movie, Somebody Up There Likes Me. Okay, where Paul Newman plays Rocky Graciano. Angels in the Outfield. He played a doctor. He had a great part in a movie called Backlash, very film noir kind of thing. So and best of all, okay, he's in a movie called Always a Bride. Okay, and it's a movie that stars George Reeves. Okay, and they both play characters that are competing for the love of Rosemary Lane. Okay, and I think it's one of George Reeves's best movies outside of Superman. And if you've not ever explored some of those, there are some terrific movies he was in. He was in, Bar 20 and Man at Large, and of course you probably know he was in Gone with the Wind, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He played a great bandit in a movie called Ride Cowboy Ride, and so if you've ever decide to just check out some of those, you'll find that George comes across on as Superman on screen. He does so well, okay, and it's because of all the work that he's done before that, okay. That's he shines on Superman, but his great some other great stuff are the early things. He was a Shakespearean actor, got his training at the Pasadena Playhouse, okay, and which is not to say that Superman was beneath him. It gave him great fame, but there's more to George Reeves than Superman. You know.
Yeah, that's some. I would be interested in exploring more of his filmography, and maybe we'll even do special episodes of this podcast or something on it. Because
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
I mean, I love his performance as Superman so much, and yeah, I would be curious. Again, George Reeves in and of himself, fascinating, right? There's a lot.
He's a
There's a
great
lot there.
actor.
Yeah. So no, I will definitely make note of that. Uh, so
Oh,
yeah, yeah. No, go
if
ahead.
I could,
Yeah.
if I could, I do have one other very trivial thing. Okay, now when the opening credits appear, right? More powerful than a locomotive, and finally you get to look up in the sky. It's a bird. That's George Reeves.
Wait, is it
Listen,
really?
listen to it very closely, and you'll hear his voice. Okay. Now, the other thing is, and I can't prove this, but I think that's his hand when, let me just fix this here, shooting the gun,
Yeah.
right? I believe that's George Reeves's hand, but I can't be 100% sure.
Hmm.
But definitely look up in the sky. That's George Reeves.
Oh, interesting. All right.
Yeah.
I'll listen more closely next time. Very cool. Because it's not. It's what does it's Stephen Carr says it has one of those lines in there, right? In that opening.
Yes. Well, I no, he doesn't actually have the line.
He's
He
just the one.
has the moment where he points,
Gotcha.
like there's the crowd,
Yep.
and then the person pointing is Steve Carr.
Okay. All right. Or I'll
So
go back and listen again. That's
yeah.
great.
So
So
George chipped in on that
yeah,
opening.
all hands on deck.
Yeah.
So the last thing we do typically is we give our rating on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras, how much we enjoyed the episode that we discussed. So, on a scale of 1 to 5 fedoras, how many would you give Crime Wave?
Well, I'm totally biased. Okay. Okay. Five being the best.
Yes.
I could never let George down.
Aw,
Five. I'll give it a 10.
aw, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. I loved the episode, and I'm very glad that you asked me to do this one. And I'm going to mention why. Because when I was going for my master's degree, okay, I had to do a lot of presentations. Okay, and the scene where Superman is at the podium.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I printed that out as a screenshot. I printed it on my HP computer, or printer, I should say. And what I did was I took that, 8 by 10 piece of paper with that image, and I put it in the sleeve of one of my binders. Okay, so that when I would go up in front of the class, okay, um, I would have that binder on my desk. Okay, so that I could see him. Okay, there was one guy in the class thought that was a little odd, but it actually gave me a little bit um, confidence. Okay, because getting up, as you know, getting up in front of a classroom or a crowd isn't always the easiest thing to do. If you really, really know your subject, okay, in and out, you're gonna ace it, right? Okay, but with all subjects that you get in school, you're not always, you're not always an A student on in every subject. So, but anyway, we had to do these presentations, and I always made sure I put that little bookbinder that held that picture, of George, at the podium because it kind of helped me get through it.
No, I can identify with that, and I love that. That's great. Look,
Yeah,
we talk
yeah,
about this character, whether this on this podcast and my other one, we talk about this character and what he means and what he inspires, and we all derive something from following this character, and so even something like that where you can look at that image of your favorite representation of the character, right, at a
yeah,
moment where maybe you need a little boost, and it can provide that. Oh,
right.
that's fantastic.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
if I can mention one other thing, another experience, and I don't want to take your show too long because I know
That's all right.
it can get long, but I was traveling to Ireland back in 1996, and I got to Heathrow Airport, and I went to go buy, and that was in England, by the way, and I went into a little shop to buy a magazine, and there was a magazine. Okay, it was called, I guess, SFX, I think it was. I still have the magazine, um, and it had Dean Cain on the cover with Terry Hatcher, and Terry Hatcher was wearing a like a superhero costume. Okay, so he was on there as Dean Cain as Superman. Next to him was Terry Hatcher. I don't know the name of the episode, but I bought the issue. Now, when I flipped through it, okay, there was a little image of Superman George Reeves. So we got on this airplane to go from Heathrow to Ireland, okay, and I want to tell you, it was one of the scariest flights of my life, okay,
Oh,
and I've been on some scary flights. So what happened is, okay, you're flying and it's complete fog, okay, and the plane is going up and down, and all the people on the plane, they're all singing. This is all Irish people. They're singing, okay? You can't believe it. They're singing like Irish, folk songs. okay, while this plane, and all I could do is focus on this picture of George
Aw,
Reeves. Okay, that was what got me through that flight. But it was a wonderful experience listening to all these people sing. But I tell you, wow, you know. But
what
that
an
was
experience. Yeah. Oh
yeah, I
man.
mean, it was, you look out the window, you couldn't see anything, and the plane is hitting turbulence like there's no tomorrow, and you just don't know what's going to happen. And I just kept looking. Now, most people would, turn to religion, right? And start, take out their rosaries and pray to the God. And I'm sure I, prayed to God a little bit, but George helped me through it too.
Yeah, listen, we there's something very powerful that we derive from these characters, and as Superman
Yeah,
fans, I think we feel that even more so with this character. So I'm
yeah, you
glad
look
that
for the
George
strength.
could be there for you. Yeah,
Yeah, you look for the strength.
absolutely.
So.
Sorry, so 5 fedoras from you. I don't want to be a downer. I'm going to go 3, but I enjoyed this. Like I enjoyed this. It was
It's okay.
a very clever use of the stock footage and the clips and everything.
Absolutely.
But it was still, of course, still very heavy on that, and our bad guys not being able to figure out the secret identity was very hard to
Right,
get
right.
past.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
but I
I know,
but
but I
but
still love it.
no, that's just great. So one of the last things I wanted to ask you, since we're now here at the end of season one, and this might be a really easy thing to answer, or maybe it's hard because you love them all so much. But season one in particular, is there an episode that you would say this is my favorite?
I haven't thought of that question before because I love them all,
Yeah, and if you can't choose, it's
Um,
okay.
but no, that's okay. I love Ghost Wolf, which was the episode before this,
Oh my god!
right?
You might want to skip that You might want to skip that episode of the podcast. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry in
That's okay.
advance.
No, that's all right.
I think
What I what I love
I've loved
about
so many,
Ghost
but
Wolf,
not that one. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I love the ending, where well, first, when Lois is all upset and she takes, her luggage and she throws it in Clark's hands, right? And he just kind of follows her along, out to to go to their cabin. Then the ending when he comes back and the water drips off of his fedora. Okay. And then there's the legend of, him falling, right?
Hmm.
From the wires. But I mean, uh, it's not probably my number one. I mean, but it's the one I can think of that I really, I love them all. I can't help it. Superman on Earth, outstanding. He walks out on you know, uh, the ledge, comes into
Yeah.
Perry's office from the ledge. I mean, whoa, and Dabbs Greer, Dabbs Greer. I met Dabbs Greer, so um, he's in that episode and a couple of others. So it's for me, it's a tough call to pick one a favorite because I love them all.
No, I love to hear that. So yeah, by the time this episode comes out, people will have heard our Ghost Wolf discussion. Yeah, I was not so hot on that one, though. There were things that I liked in it, and we talked about that. But
Yeah,
for me, especially coming off of what I felt was like a really strong run of episodes before it, it just kind of was a little bit of a letdown after the ones before it, like Czar of the Underworld, which I was a huge fan of. But in any event, this is such a maybe a minor silly question, but one thing while you're here, let me ask you this. One thing I've noticed, Clark is only ever wearing, except in Superman on Earth when you see him on the farm before he leaves. Throughout the rest of the season, you only ever see him in his suit or his Superman costume, or I guess his robe at home. Yet there are instances like when he goes to Haiti with Perry White, or when
yeah.
they're in the woods for Ghost Wolf, where it would seem like an opportune time to change up his attire to suit the environment. Yet he's always as Clark, just in that suit. Was that just a budget thing, or what was going on there?
I don't know. I really don't know. They shot fast. They
Yeah,
had these scripts and they just kept it close to the sleeve. They didn't. They didn't really expand too much, but but you'll in the color episodes Superman Silvermine, you'll see Clark in his pajamas and in a bathrobe. Okay, but they really kept it close to the sleeve,
Yeah.
you know, and you know, I don't know why. Maybe it's just a product of the times. If you watch Father Knows Best, right, with Robert Young, okay, he's always wearing a suit.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Fair enough. It's just I feel like when he's in the jungle or the woods, like this
Oh
guy's
yeah.
something else to
Well, you
wear.
know what? Yeah, yeah. You will see in the color episodes. There's well, no, in the 53 season, there's jungle drums,
Okay.
okay, that he's not wearing the Clark Kent
Okay.
outfit, or
Yeah.
right. Then there's Dagger Island. He's trying to think, was he wearing the Clark Kent suit? Not sure, but I know there was another jungle. Um, there was another jungle one where he wasn't wearing the Clark Kent outfit, but they didn't deviate too much, you know.
Yeah.
But but let me ask you,
Yeah.
did you give any episode of season one a five,
Yes.
Fedora?
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah. I did.
Okay.
It's killing me because I should have just been keeping a running list so that I could easily reference it, and I have not. So
Yeah. Right.
I don't
Right.
know
Yeah.
offhand, but I I feel like Mind Machine I gave a five. I
Love
love
it.
Mind Machine. I think Stolen Costume I gave a five.
Love it.
Czar of the Underworld, if not a five, a 4.5. That was really up there.
I
So
think I know why.
why?
When the dummy hits the wall,
Oh
when
yeah,
he's carrying the dummy,
yeah.
right? Clunk.
Yeah, there is that. But yeah, no, they're. I mean, I can. I won't. Again, we'll wrap this up here. But like in my head, I can sort of. I feel like there are maybe three tiers of episodes for me as I look at season one. The ones that there were a few that really just didn't work for me. There's a bunch that were just kind of. I don't want to say middle of the road, but like they were solid. I enjoyed them. I don't know how much I'll be going back to them in the future, but I enjoy them. And then there are the ones that like really I thought were particularly strong. So look, with anything,
Evil
you know,
3.
yeah,
Evil 3 is
I feel like that
outstanding.
was a five. That was probably a five. I have to go back
Yeah.
and listen to all of the ends of the episodes and make my list. But yeah, no, there were a bunch that were really up there for sure.
If you know Jan Allen Henderson,
Mm-hmm.
okay, his Elsa, okay, Cecil Elliott, who played Elsa, is his godmother.
Mm.
Okay, and when he was a little boy, okay, he was watching that episode, okay, in the presence of Cecil Elliott. And when she would watch that show, do you recall how she laughed, on that
Yes.
show?
Yeah.
Well, as a little boy, he's seeing her really laugh like that and seeing her laugh on television. It had to be a strange experience for him.
Absolutely. Oh, that's
Yeah.
wild. So listen, anything that we didn't talk about in this episode, we'll save it because if you're game, I would love to have you back when we get into season two.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
Awesome.
that'd be great.
In
Yeah.
the meantime, I really, we were talking off mic. Obviously, we've been exchanging messages over Facebook, but this is the first time that we've actually spoken, and I really really enjoyed this, and I thank you so much for your time. This really was a treat. I mentioned at the top you're the author of Mr. Reeves. Do you want to direct people to where they could find that if they want to give it a read?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for mentioning that. You could find it at Jim Bauer's website, Caped Wonder. And you go down I think the pull down menus, you'll eventually find it. But it's the story of George Reeves. Okay. I've kind of studied his whole life, for the longest time. Met a lot of great people because of it. And, I was in the house in 1995, in June 1995, I did a walkthrough in George's house. So if you happen to get to those pages where you're inside George's house, that was all done from memory. Okay, how I, set that all up. Okay, so it was. a terrific experience for me to get that all out. There was, really much more I wanted to do with it. But I think I got, the message there, and I hope people, find it interesting. And, so it tells the story of, George's life and eventually, getting towards the tragic death of him, which, it's all fascinating, and it's unfortunate for the, for all, whatever you could say about it. It's just a tragedy for, for him. It's if he had continued on, he probably would have been doing, guest appearances on, other shows, for a while until he got reestablished. He wanted to do a couple of films that he was, trying to, get funding for. So, if anybody was to, read that and be interested in discussing it with me, they can reach me at looper56 at AOL.com. So I always enjoyed, talking about George Reeves in any capacity, not just the death, but, life especially.
Yeah. Well, I hope everyone will check that out. And that's very gracious of you to give your contact info. And I hope people will take you up on that. Again, this was great to hear from you. You have such a wealth of knowledge about the show and about George Reeves and a real love and passion for it. And so just to hear from you and ask some of these questions that I've had, it's really been great. So I thank you.
Well, if you could get a hold of, if you're interested in Keith Thibodeau, you'll let me know. I think other great people that would be an asset to your show would be like a Jan Allen Henderson. Okay. Also, I think he would have fun with this. Okay. And also Michael J. Hayde. Okay. Mike would be a fantastic, person to talk to about any episode.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of episodes to go. So
tell him he has to do Mr. 00-1.
Okay. Well, Lou, thank you again so much.
Audience, oh, you're welcome.
Thank you as always for tuning in. Make sure you come back in 2 weeks. We'll be talking about Superman and the Mole Men, aka The Unknown People, parts 1 and 2, which will close
I'll be there.
Season 1. Thank you. We'll be joined by Ed Gross, author of the oral history of Superman called Voices from Krypton, which is available now. I'm really looking forward to bringing him on for the first time to talk about all of this.
That'll be good.
Yeah, so make sure you come back in 2 weeks for Superman and the Mole Men. Of course, right. As always.
And never worry about whether you don't score a 5 on things. It's okay. These are your perspectives.
Yes.
And so it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
We baby boomers tend to gloss over a lot, of the show. We tend to, we see that when we see the wires or we see certain things, a rip, maybe there's a rip in, the S somewhere, right? It's all part of the charm of the show.
Yeah, no, honestly, and I've said this, any sort of limitations production wise, to me, that also does just contribute to its charm, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, when we talk about these things, I do talk about things I don't like. And yes, I'm sure there are fans who just only want to
it's okay.
celebrate the show. And that's fine. Ultimately, of course, I do still consider this a celebration, but I also have to be honest. And, and I don't ever worry because honestly, if someone's ever turned off because I express a negative opinion and they don't want to hear it, that's fine because it would not be the kind of show I would want to do if I was just like, I just gushing about it, right? I have to be honest in both directions. And when I say I really like something, I really like something. Like I mean it.
That's right. That's right. So that's admirable. And it's a great trait. And I love what you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. All right, audience, come back in 2 weeks. Adventures await. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.